Hello everyone, my name is the Phawx. This is my review on the GPD WinMax. This is GPD's latest gaming handheld and one that I consider to be the best gaming handheld of 2020. I say that without hyperbole and knowing that we still have the rest of 2020 to go through, but knowing what I know and seeing what I see, there will be nothing that meaningfully materializes that will compete against the WinMax as a gaming handheld in performance. Feature set, price, performance, all of them. There's nothing that is going to touch this device for the rest of 2020. This is the device to get. And I'll explain later why in this review video. A few things that I want to touch base on before we get into the review proper. Number one, this is a prototype, a beta unit that GPD feels confident enough to send to reviewers such as myself. Typically, we are charged with showing you, the audience, real-world gaming performance of different games. What I like to do is I show you in-game settings. If I have to tweak any of those settings outside of the game to boost frame rate potentially. On top of that, I will show you an in-game HUD that shows you frame rate, frame time, how much the temperature of the SoC itself, how much wattage we're pumping to the SoC, as well as the GPU frequency. Those are the 5 critical points that I've seen as I've been going through this stuff on my channel. Now, one of the things that often comes up about this particular device is that a lot of people say that this is too big to be considered a gaming handheld. Having used it for 2 weeks, it is the preferred size for me. I have a lot of people know me with the GPD Win 2. I have used this device extensively. I only use this device really on my commute. Typically, I always use a desktop for anything else because this was only a gaming handheld. This is the size of a 3DS XL, but it is a full PC. It is still unmatched for its footprint. There is nothing that is better up until 2021. There was nothing that is going to compete with the Win 2 in performance inside of its form factor. The Win Max obviously is better in a lot of ways, and I'm going to go over that in this review. But for people that feel that this device is too large, it really isn't. And the best thing that I've been able to try to arrange in a thought is if you could remember when you were holding like an iPhone 4 or smaller phones, and now all phones are, these phones that are large phones are now considered regular size phones, and anything smaller than this, like an iPhone 4, would be considered a small phone. It's kind of like that. When I pick up the Win 2, it feels tiny in my hands, whereas the Win Max feels normal now. Additionally, the weight of the device isn't that bad. Let me show you real quick. I've weighed it at 823.2 grams. This isn't sensationally heavy. It's considerably under 2 pounds. I know I'm going to sound crazy, but I wish that it was a little bit heavier heavier. I want more battery. I want more battery in this thing, so I wouldn't mind more weight. It's not hard to hold for length of time. How I use it in my bed is I've had it propped up on my lap and just using the controllers. It's super comfortable. I've been using it all over the place. In fact, I found myself using it more than the Win 2 because the Win 2, I pretty much limit to games only, especially only having 8 gigs of RAM. This device having 16 gigs of RAM, I've been carrying it all around my house. I use it as often as I'm using my desktop because I carry it around with me. So that is one critical thing that I wanted to kind of address. I know it seems big, but you really have to give it a try. It is not too large. In fact, I would like it to be a little bit larger. As we can see here, we have pretty big borders on the display itself. You can kind of see the border. See if I can. I don't mind if that's a bogus account, so I don't care if you see that silly password. But you can see the borders on this. I would actually like a display that goes to the very edge and larger. If it had a full 9.5, 9-inch, 10-inch display, I would be super happy with that. So yeah, I would like something that had a bigger battery and larger display. We'll get on more to that later on as I go. I just wanted to kind of talk about that first, that you have to give it a try. You have to be open-minded enough to think that this actually isn't that large. It's not going to fit in your pocket. Well, for some people, it'll fit in their pockets. For a lot of people, it's not going to fit in your pocket. It's not going to be pocketable. It'll be portable. But it is my favorite device ever. Now, having said that, the other thing I want to say before we go into the review proper is that we are looking at kind of a lot of my YouTube studio setup right now, something that I felt I've been trying to set up for a while, and I'm glad that I have it arranged enough that we're doing this. This review is a little bit free-flowing, so hopefully you can kind of stick with me and just stay there. We're going to begin the review proper right now. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about is, if you're seeing this video before the Indiegogo goes live, for the WinMax. The Indiegogo for the WinMax starts in 48 hours. Obviously, if you're seeing this right now, it's not yet. If you're a subscriber of mine, hey, how's it going? If you're just a person that looks at handheld stuff and other things, well, hey, how's it going? If you're a person that is 48 hours into the future and is on Indiegogo, has never seen my face before, how's it going? What I would recommend for you, the Indiegogo person, is to click on the YouTube link, whichever side it's on. Just push that button and jump on over to YouTube and still see this video of mine. But go under the fold, underneath the video, and look in the description field. There's going to be 3 links. One of them is going to be the Indiegogo page, which is not going to be terribly useful for you because you'll just come from there. The second one is going to be a link to my GPD Discord. Come on over, ask me questions. If you have any inquiries at all, I'm going to be there. I have the device. If you want to ask me questions about it, I'm there to answer them for you. Additionally, we have a lot of cool and awesome people in that Discord who will probably answer it before I even get to it because they're cool and awesome. The third link will be a link to the GPD WinMax playlist on my YouTube channel. I put all of my videos that pertain to the WinMax in that playlist. Now, I'm not going to cover every game that I've ever done. We'll go through a few of them in this video of like the types of performance that you can expect out of the WinMax. But it's important to realize that I'm not going to put them all there. If you want to see very specific, longer 10-minute, 12-minute videos on performance, please head on over to that playlist because you're going to get a better understanding it. Again, we're going to go over it in this benchmark, but it's going to be more generalized, okay? That's the only thing I wanted to say before we begin this review proper. Now, one of the things that I charge myself with is, if you take a look at the Indiegogo page itself, there's a lot of information to digest. There is a tremendous amount of information that GPD has put into this particular Indiegogo campaign. They do it often. And it's helpful because they're trying to sell you on like, look how much we have everything in the kitchen sink in this device. So one of the things that I'm going to try to do is try to break down some of the things that they've listed there, and we'll go topic by topic, and I'll show off different things, and we'll kind of talk about them. So let's begin. So first things first, we are going to take a look at the display. So the display is an 8-inch device. It is 1280 by 800. Technically, it is 800 by 1280. It is a portrait display. So one of the things that I think is worthwhile to show you right now, let me load this back up because it went into sleep mode. I'm going to run, now the display itself is actually portrait, like this, but inside the Intel Ice Lake 1035G7 only supports embedded DisplayPort. It does not support what this panel is, which is a MIPI panel. Inside the WinMax, there's a little converter that transfers eDP from the Ice Lake to MIPI, this panel. Basically, it's like if you put a DisplayPort to HDMI cable adapter. Same type of principle, right? You're just converting sync and what all stuff and things so that it can display properly, right? So one of the things I want to show you is if I run Abe's Odyssey, which is an older game, this is going to be a lot of things that are problematic on older games, anything before DirectX 9, because they are going to try to resolve on that portrait display and things are going to get wonked out and you're going to get a bunch of errors. Now, on the Win 2, it would resolve, but you would have it be like half of the screen and it would be all messed up. It's still the same type of fixes. Now, I went on Reddit and asked a lot of people what games they had problems running. Not in this particular video, but I will make another video later on that covers a lot of those older games and things that you have to do to fix that. Now, I'm going to show you right here that it is fixable. It's not like it's going to be broken forever. So right here in real time, I'm not going to do anything crazy. Go ahead and copy some configuration files. All right, so we're just going to go in here and I'm going to paste a Rooney that and say, yes, please copy to that directory. Now we're going to go out of here. So we put configuration files that basically fixes how it's supposed to be drawn, and it runs no problem. So there are fixes for that. It's just something that I wanted to kind of touch base on. Loud noises, just so that you knew. Now, GPD claims that this is at full brightness, 500 nits of brightness. I don't have a meaningful tool to actually test that brightness for you, so I will have to accept what GPD gives as an answer there. Very quickly, let's go back over into the browser. Now, The pixels per inch is 189 pixels per inch. I know that there are people that wish that this was a larger resolution. It looks amazing on the device itself. I really have. I know that there is this always this desire for a larger resolution. It really isn't necessary, and I found myself even now enjoying having that 800p, just because there's a lot of games that just have that as a resolution, and we don't have to like kind of fight to force a lower resolution. The Ice Lake chip isn't super powerful. It needs lower resolution to draw games faster, to render them faster. It's important for us to have that lower resolution. It still looks really nice, and the reason that GPD is showing you this pixels per inch is because they're trying to convey to you that it's still super high. It's, past Retina class. Now, CPU. This is the Mac Daddy. Now, on Intel Ice Lake, this is the 1035 G7. This is the second best Ice Lake chip. There is the 1065 G7. We don't need that chip for all intents and purposes. This is the best chip that we can possibly have, especially value wise. It would be completely wasteful to get the 1065 G7. Again, we are GPU starved. There's a very little increase in frequency on GPU on the 1065 G7. There's a bigger increase on CPU. We'd be spending way too much power to get terribly small gains. It's just not worth it. The 1035 G7 is as good as we want. Now, the one thing that is super surprising about this, let me go ahead and jump back into the browser, is we're going to take a look at these GPD benchmarks. So these are benchmarks that I have done myself across a variety of different TDPs and cores. You can see 25 watt, 4 core, 25 watt, 2 core, and so on. Now, the one thing, if you even go into 2 watt, 4 core, if you take a look at this Geekbench 4 score at 5,000 points, this is a tremendously high score for 12 watt. It is crazy high. In comparison, let me just go and show you real quick. In comparison, so this right here is the P2 Max, and this is the 8100Y. This is on the later Win 2 models. You can see that, again, we're Microsoft Windows. Linux and Mac do get better Geekbench scores, so I wanted to find the best Windows score for the P2 Max. Like this is the best P2 Max score, and this is the best Ice Lake score. And you can kind of see them that it's drastic. This is like 40% better CPU performance. That is, it's ginormous. So the one thing that is really awesome about the CPU is that even outside of gaming type performance stuff, is that the CPU is mighty. The Sunny Cove cores are really good. Plus, we have a more complete AVX 512 extension set. I'm very, very impressed with the CPU side of the chip. The GPU side is really the place that's wanting greatly. And we'll kind of go over that in a bit, but I just wanted to kind of just very quickly talk about that on the CPU side, that the CPU is the star of the show. Like, these things are killer. If you wanted to get the Win Max, not even for gaming purposes, you just wanted to have it as like a solid laptop, a solid UMPC, it is like 16 gigs of RAM, LPDDR4, 3,733 megahertz. It's a killer laptop, especially for the price. As a UMPC, it is hard to beat. So I could even understand people that just wanted it as just a laptop. And like, the gaming portion, like, oh, well, whatever. It's impressive. Intel did a good job with the CPU. So let's go ahead and go on to the next part. We are going to start talking about the GPU. Now, the GPU, I have mixed feelings on. Let's go ahead and take a look at the benchmark real quick, the benchmarks that I've done. So if we go over here, let me see if I can raise this up a little bit. This is a lot of different... Let's try to break this down a bit. So down here you can see the TDP and the core count. When you see the core count, I am physically disabling the CPU cores. And the reason I do that is twofold. Let me quickly explain. When we go down to 2 core, the dual core configuration of Ice Lake is that it will increase the frequency of the CPU to 3.6 gigahertz instead of 3.3 gigahertz against quad core. So we get a 10%, 12% boost to CPU, which helps us in some cases where a lot of DirectX 11 games really want a lot of single-threaded speed and they want a lot of GPU. We get a benefit of that. I mean, typically you want a lot of CPU speed for higher frame rates. You still need the GPU to drive it, but you can't get super high frame rates without that frequency. So I have those tests for you just so that you can kind of see. On top of that, the division of power, when you only have two CPU cores, we can actually divert more power to the GPU, especially, and that's when it kind of gets really more beneficial when we start going down in TDP. So let me go ahead and show you that again. So now there are basically three configurations that I would recommend. If you are, let me go ahead and, if you are anywhere in this particular segment right here, I mean 20-watt quad core is fine. As soon as you start going past under 20-watt, like when you start going over in this area, I really do recommend start looking into 2-core. We really start taking more power away from the GPU, and things get even more hairy when you go lower than that. I'll show you that in a second. But 2-core 12-watt is what I would say is the minimum TDP that you should have running on your WinMax. So if I go very briefly, let me go ahead and bear with me while I open this up. If I go to lower wattage tests, okay, so all right, so right here, the things that I want you to kind of look at right here, you can see right in here that I'm running this at 8 watt as well as running the Win 2 at 8 watt. And you can see that the Win 2 is actually beating the Win Max at this TDP. Going less than this, it really starts to hurt us pretty bad. Let me quickly show you another one. So this right here is 5 watt, and the the Win 2 at 5 watt. You can see that we really start to rob the power out of the Win Max at these low TDPs. Again, that's why I really do recommend to target a minimum of 12 watt. And here at 12 watt, again, this Win Max right over here, in this particular configuration, this is running at 12 watt 2-core. And obviously this is 12 watt 2-core, but you can see that we actually do have, we start to outpace the Win 2 at this wattage. So that's just something that I kind of wanted to talk about briefly. Is like, I know that there are some people here that, well, there are some people that are watching that are interested in taking their Win Max in different directions than other people, because maybe you just want to play retro indie games, maybe you just want to play older emulation games, and you don't need 25 watts. You want to extend your battery life. You want to have a lot of battery life. Again, that's part of the benefit and fun of these devices, that you can take them and run them how you want to run them. Let's go back to the browser real quick. But yeah, so like kind of wrapping up here, you can kind of quickly see the Street Fighter scores are kind of throwing things off for you a little bit, because you're going to kind of see them running around. Here, again, you see the 2-core at 25 watt, and Street Fighter is winning a little bit. This is because this difference that we see is, the only difference here is because we're able to achieve higher frame rate, because we are able to achieve a higher CPU frequency. Street Fighter 4 is not terribly hard to run. It's a older DirectX 9 game, so if you just wanted to go frequency crazy, this is where you are. And then you can see that we take a pretty big hit in CloudGate. The reason that we take a hit in CloudGate is because of the physics score. A lot of times, often in 3D Mark tests, there is a physics score as well, which is very CPU dependent. So if we have more CPUs to run those physics tests, obviously that's going to inflate the score. And it's still valid. It's just that this score is kind of artificially put up because of those physics scores. So that's just something that I wanted to touch base on. Here you can see the Firestrike score, and largely those are the same at 25 watt. So if you are going to run at 25 watt, if you're going to run at 25 watt or 20 watt, my recommendation would be to just use all 4 CPUs. There's not a giant difference in terms of performance or benefit to doing 2-core. Anything less than 20 watt, you really should be going down to 2-core, disabling 2 of your CPUs. You're just going to be able to divert more power to the GPU because they desperately need it. Although, as you saw in the 5 watt and 8 watt tests, performance will tank drastically. Even at the system level, it will feel super sluggish for you. It's important that that distinction is made. The last bit of the GPU side of things that I wanted to talk about was integer scaling. So very briefly, let me go ahead and switch on over to here. Integer scaling is built into Ice Lake, and if we can quickly look, there we go. So this right here is without integer scaling. You can see that it's kind of smoothing the edges, and it makes retro games and a lot of other stuff look pretty gnarly. And then this is with integer scaling on, and you get those nice clean edges. It's just a really awesome feature to have. I can't recommend it enough. So that's another part of the GPU that GPD is not kind of highlighting in their big thing, is that integer scaling is a thing, and you should use it when you want to, because it's such an improvement for retro games, especially using integer scaling. If you wanted to reduce the resolution like crazy on certain games just to increase frame rate on games and then stretch it back out with integer scaling, that would look better than the interpolated mess that can often happen there. I know that a lot of people would, I do as well. I do prefer that look. So now let's go back. Let me close out this thing. We're going to go start looking at the next bit on the list is the storage. Now, for the storage, there's not a tremendous amount to talk about here. I have done a video on my channel, and again, you can take a look at that. It's how to replace the SSD on your WinMax. I put a SATA SSD in here, and I can confirm that it does work just fine. The idle times of SATA do seem to be better than the default BiWin NVMe SSD that GPD will be including for you. Having said that, in use, when you're using it for games and stuff, I don't see any power benefit. So ultimately, I would say I still recommend NVMe over SATA because there doesn't seem to be a gigantic reason. Obviously, just get an NVMe that has very good power characteristics like Samsung 970 Pro and whatnot, and you'll be fine. Outside of that, the only other thing worth talking about is the micro SD card for storage. This is an A2 compatible slot, application performance SD. So it supports over 512 gigabytes and double the speed at a minimum of 10 megabytes a second reads. I don't have any A2 cards. I have so many micro SD cards that I don't have an appetite to buy anymore. Also, the speeds of my A1 card are 90 megabyte reads and 40 megabyte writes, and that more has to do with the device itself. And as far as I can see, I do pass the A1 speed limit. So the speeds that GPD is showing in here, I would have to assume are very accurate. Now, Wi-Fi, this is using the Intel AX200 chipset. It's actually really great. So that's going to give you Wi-Fi 6 as well as Bluetooth 5. I've been able to do the max internet connection that I have, so I have 75 megabits up and down. I was actually able to go over that, which is pretty funny. You will be dependent on your Wi-Fi routers, but it is capable up to Wi-Fi 6. Again, just showing you the versatility and how awesome the WinMax is, that it has something as forward-looking. It includes the latest and greatest that can be had in the Max. Everything and the kitchen sink is included in this thing. It is the best device ever. Thunderbolt 3 is a game changer for a lot of people. I've already done a video on that. Let me go ahead and kind of switch over to that real quick. So this is me using the eGPU solution. And again, you can go and take a look on my channel to see this directly. But this is something that just works. I have used the Razer Core X, and while it was able to see the enclosure, I was not able to successfully see the GPU. I switched over to a Sonnet eGPU breakaway cable. I kind of talk about the performance penalty from using an eGPU cable. Here you can see that we are getting 60 frames a second in Monster World Hunter. This is at ultra settings at 800p. And more to the point, you can see the package power here. There's no way that we'd be able to achieve these types of that type of performance without having an eGPU solution. And then there's, of course, the method of, also virtual reality of plugging directly into the GPU slot itself. But here you can see that I am running Monster World Hunter at 4K. You can't see it because at the top it got cut off, but this is running at 25 to 30 frames a second. Obviously, if you went down in some settings, kept it at 4K, we could get an easily higher frame rate. But more to the point, this is basically going back to how versatile the WinMax is, and especially if you want to use this device as your only device. If you have a gaming PC, the idea of an eGPU, I must agree, is not very attractive. But if the idea of using this as your sole device is a I could conceptually I can say that I have no problem thinking of this as my sole device. Using the 16 gigs of RAM is a good minimum amount of RAM to actually just be usable in general, but also to come home and then put it down and then dock in and just plug into the Thunderbolt port, which is right there. It's worth noting that you can plug into just power. You can plug into any one of these if you just want to power, but specifically you need to use the Thunderbolt port, which is right there. What's nice about that is that when you plug in with the eGPU, it'll actually charge the device at the same time, which is what you want it to do. You want a docking solution so that you increase your performance when you're at home, charge the device so that you can take it with you, and have the best of both worlds. That is actually a killer feature for people. I can understand why people would want it, especially if it's your only device. The other thing that we already talked about micro SD, HDMI, the HDMI interface. There's a few things that I want to talk about right there, and I should actually go into that, but I think I'll leave that for the controller part of it because I have tested latency of the controls out of HDMI as well, and it is as good as it is on device. I guess I can just say it right here, right now. What I have recorded using a high-speed camera, 240 frames a second, I've recorded that the latency from button press is around 50 millisecond, which is near as optimal as we could hope to be, which is pretty impressive. I'm just very satisfied with the controls part of it, but HDMI is 2.0, so you can do 4K 60 no problem. It also supports HDR and all the other goodness, and that's actually accurate as GP shows it on their page. The Ethernet port. This is the RJ45 port. I actually use this a few times. That's right there. It's built in. There's no adapter necessary. You can just kind of plug in. I have confirmed I saturate gigabit, so I get 111 megabytes a second right there. Works perfect. Nothing more to say. It's convenient and awesome. We'll go back to here. Now the keyboard, touchpad, mouse, and joystick and D-pad and stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at this for a second because there's a few things that I want to touch base on. So one thing that I had requested of GPD years ago now at this point was if they could change the D-pad. You can see right there, because a lot of people, it is serviceable. The D-pad on the Win 2 is serviceable, but it has left a lot of people wanting, myself included. You can finesse it and get to a point that you're happy with it. But the one thing that I had asked GPD is, like, I said, hey, GPD, the PS Vita is like my gold standard for D-pads and face buttons. Could you possibly just give us that experience? And they did. And I can confirm that even the face buttons, if you have a PS Vita at your house, you can just literally pick up a PS Vita and feel the D-pad and the face buttons, and it is as good as that. Very quickly, we're going to start looking at some other videos right now so that we can kind of get a better idea of some other tests that I've done. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at some controller stuff. Let me go here. All right. All right. Okay, so you're seeing this, but the one thing that is not probably going to come across all that well is, like, if we go here and I go into properties, you can see that this is 240 frames a second, and that's how I calculated the latency of the controls themselves. So there's a few things going on. We're going to go on to that in a little bit, but the controllers themselves have a latency of around 50 milliseconds, which is great. I really can't complain about that. Keys and analog. So one thing that you can see here that's pretty important is that you can kind of see me just kind of hammering away at these buttons, and that there is no misclicks. There's nothing that they're sensationally responsive and accurate. There has never been a time that I found myself, at least initially, but once I got there was a firmware update for my gamepad that largely improved that experience greatly for me. Here we are taking a look at the analog sticks and take a look at the dead zone. The dead zone has been minimalized greatly. It pretty much activates almost immediately. The only thing that I kind of want to point out here is that at the cardinal directions, northwest, south, east, there is kind of this well, and you can kind of see it here. If we step into the video, if I kind of just go through it a little bit, it has this tendency to stick at the cardinal directions, uh, even if you're moving along it. And that's one thing that, for me, I don't mind it at all. It's kind of nice to have something that you know that it's going to be, if you're pushing left, right, up or down, even if you're a little bit off on the analog stick, that it's going to be true north. I know some people don't really like that, and they want the actual data that they're giving it and not anything interrupting or intercepting that data. In practice, I find that it's just fine. Okay, so this is an interesting thing. This is a thing that I'm going to bring up to GPD, is that when you press the right shift key, it actually shows up as left shift key. So just so you can see right here, it's actually showing up as the left shift key. So that's something that I have to do, I have to bring up to GPD, and that's not really a gigantic concern, but just something that I thought I would show you nonetheless. This right here is just a touchpad demo. So it's just to show you that it is multi-touch accessible. So 2-finger scroll left and right, up and down will operate as it does. And then 3-finger swipe does work on the touchpad as well. Here is a keyboard test of word per minute score. Now, one of the things that I think is worthwhile to pointing out is that my best word per minute score when I'm in the zone is around 85 to 90 words per minute. I am not a tremendously fast typer, but I found myself reasonably typing on this device after some time, and this is just a demo of that. This particular demo is just showing you the N key rollover, which is about 7 keys. You can see that I'm holding 4 keys here, and I can still touch an additional 3 keys before no other keys will be able to be touched. And if we go on later into the video, you can see that the frequency, the polling rate that these particular devices are set to is 140 hertz, which largely is fine. It's quite a bit over double 60 hertz, so it's over double what the frame rate of the display is set at, which is more than fine for our purposes and what we want. And then last is the backlight of the keyboard itself. So the backlight of the keyboard, and this is just kind of just to demonstrate what it's like, it is a very, very faint backlight. It is not super intense. It is ideal for being in darkness. Like, it's not going to blast your eyeballs out. Also, if the backlight of your screen is on too bright, it will overpower the backlit keys themselves. So, and when you're playing in darkness, you really should lower the brightness of the display so that you don't overpower the backlight of the keyboard itself. Okay, so we've talked about the latency of the gamepad, the gamepad keys themselves, the analog sticks this time around, they do click. So L3 and R3 do work, which is awesome. And obviously, this is the first GPD device that has clickable L3 and R3. We've talked about the D-pad, how it's Vita-like, how it's excellent. The latency of the controllers themselves, the keyboard keys, how I feel about them. Now, one thing that I do want to talk about with regard to the keyboard is the placement of the keys. I do have some misgivings here. This caps lock key is next to useless for me. I just really recommend disabling it. This row of keys down here, especially down here for the apostrophe and stuff, it's not super awesome. It does take time to get used to it. And then the keys up top here, I really don't like half-width keys if they're horizontal or vertical. There's no real way for me to say it nicely. They are barely functionable. All the other keys of just like general typing are great, but all those other keys surrounding it aren't super awesome. Okay, so the battery. The battery is this is 3 series 1 parallel 11.7 volt, winds up being a little bit more when it's actually in use. It's a 57.4 watt hour, kind of 58 watt hour battery. How that is going to work in practice, if we go through my battery tests here, We'll go to browser. So this particular test that you're seeing right here, this is the battery at full and what I would consider to be moderate use. In this particular case, we are streaming a 4K YouTube video at half brightness with full speaker sound, and you can see that once we get to the 20% mark, which is right here. Once we get to the 20% mark, the system kind of starts going into a lower power mode, and then we're only using around 7 watts total system power. And then, we kind of gradually taper off. This entire process right here of moderate use is 6.5 hours. So with moderate use, you should expect 6.5 hours. What GPD claims as light use for 14 hours. It's possible with the SATA SSD, with the NVMe, you'd have to do some more extreme power saving to get that high. But it would be extremely light use, almost to the point of just looking over Word documents and barely typing into them. There's going to be spiky consistencies. I think that as a rational, conservative max power, you're looking at like 8 hours tops. But for a moderate use, 6 hours, 6.5 hours is actually reasonable. When we start looking at playing games, it's entirely different because of how much power you are going to want to use. By default, it's going to be 25 watt. And again, in Fallout 3, it's going to vary based on what you're doing in game. So if you're indoors, you're going to be able to hit a high frame rate and then cap off at 60 frames a second, and then the power usage is going to come down. So the power is going to be fluctuating as you are looking around, going into indoor areas, outdoor areas that are drawing more things, rendering more things, then requiring more power. So to say that it's going to be like something absolute is hard because it relies on the type of game that you're running. If the game or thing that you're doing is going to constantly drive the WinMax at its max, you should only anticipate about an hour and 40 minutes of game time. That's if you're driving it all the way, okay? That is 25 watt nonstop. The heatsink on the WinMax will handle it no problem. It's just that the battery is one of the few things that I found myself wanting on this device to be larger. So one of the things that they do include in the box itself is this very tiny 65 watt charger. It is I can just put up the 3DS XL next to it. It is super tiny. And this is a 65 watt charger, so it'll charge like MacBooks and other things. The other thing that is worth noting is that for a battery bank, it does need to be PD compliant, preferably something that is like PD 3.0, and at a minimum has an output of 15 volts. Just so you know, otherwise it's not going to charge. What's pretty hilarious is that I had a PD compliant charger battery bank that had 12 watt max, so it wasn't able to charge the device. What was funny is that the WinMax was actually charging my battery bank, which I found to be pretty funny because I was looking at my battery metrics and I was like, say, hey, why am I using 30 watts? Because it was charging the battery bank. So I mean that's the end of my review. We talked about a lot. Again, I think you should talk a lot. I think you should take a look at the performance results on my playlist to get an idea of specific games. We touch base on the benchmarks specifically and kind of how that looks within TDP and wattage. If you want further details, obviously just continue to look at that playlist as I'll be adding to it as time goes on. Largely, this device is my favorite. There are a few things. I wish the device was larger. I wish that the screen was bigger. I don't like that it has these borders here. If it had a borderless screen, that would make me happy. If this keyboard was just a little bit larger so that we can get rid of these half-width keys, I would be happy about that. It's serviceable, completely serviceable touch type for most everything. Hitting the apostrophe key bothers me to no end. This caps lock key, just disable it. The touchpad is great. The game controls are so good. Performance-wise, CPU is killer on this device. The GPU, I still find myself wanting. We're basically at 25 watt. As a generality, we're 2 times more power, 2 times more gaming performance than the Win 2. CPU-wise, we crush it. We're like 40% higher. Even in 12 watt, it's insane. The CPU on this device is really great. Overall, I am super, super happy with this device. It is now my go-to device. I find myself using it all the time. With the Wind 2, I was just literally using it for my commute, and since I've not been commuting lately, it's just been kind of sitting around. And obviously, this is the new hotness, and I've been using it a lot. But having actual L3 and R3 buttons, a more traditional trigger buttons. Overall, this is my favorite device. I really can't say more happy things about it. I wish that it had a larger battery. I wish that it had a bigger screen. I wish that it was a little bit bigger. This would make it heavier and larger. And I know that some people already find this too large as it is. Again, give it a chance. If you're on the fence, it really isn't that large. Like, look at my hands. Like, it's not much to have. You can one hand it like easily. It's no problem. Yeah, so this has been my review of the GPD Win Max. Thank you for sticking along. Hopefully all the like bookmark stuff is populated correctly on YouTube. That's it. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.